Chapter 1. Carceri, the Still Prison. The sky above the black ship of the Inquisition did not crack open, nor did it bleed any wound of reality. Instead, the void was merely a crushing, indifferent blackness pressing against the vessel's hull, a prison infinitely colder and vaster than any Caesar had ever known. He woke not to the clamor of battle, but to the hiss of pressurized gas and the low, mournful groan of ancient machinery. He had slept for millennia. He had slept through the death of one world and the birth of a grotesque empire. A stasis sarcophagus was no deathbed, but a mockery of immortality. The crystalline sheen of the freezing medium cracked and peeled back, like shedding skin revealing the man within. Julius Caesar, the revenant strategos, lay suspended, his features preserved in the image of cold, unyielding bronze. The chamber reeked of formaldehyde ozone and the chemical tang of cryogenic preservation, assaulting senses that should have been long dormant. The air was frigid, thick with a fine mist of liquid nitrogen that clung to the metal floor. A figure emerged from the shifting mist. Tall, gaunt, clad in layers of reinforced black cloth and polished adamantium, Inquisitor Valeria. Beside her stood another, a being of brass and wire, Magos Cole, whose single blazing optical sensor regarded Caesar with the cold, detached curiosity reserved for a piece of salvaged, potentially dangerous archaeotech. Valeria's voice, when it came, was a low, resonant command that cut through the mechanical static. "Awake, CO1. You have been recalled from your slumber. Your great sleep is over. Behold the glorious Imperium of man." Caesar blinked. His throat felt like sun-scorched earth, and his muscles ached with the memory of a death that had been both swift and humiliating. He felt the cold not as physical discomfort, but as a deliberate insult to his once supreme vitality. He pushed himself up from the stasis slab, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing in the sterile silence. He was naked save for the faint glow of the preservation runes etched into his skin, an obscene, high-tech tattoo. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, fell upon the Inquisitor. "You wake me not out of clemency." Caesar finally spoke, his voice, a deep, gravelly baritone that felt foreign even to his own ears. It was a voice that had commanded the loyalty of legions and dictated terms to kings. "There is no clemency in this prison. There is only necessity." He surveyed the claustrophobic confines of the chamber, the heavy riveted bulkhead doors, the faint disturbing vox static that seemed to carry the distant cries of the damned. "Tell me your fear. For where fear reigns, so too does opportunity." Magos Cole, a figure of pure mechanical logic, allowed a series of binary clicks to substitute for a scoff. Inquisitor Valeria, however, showed a flicker of grudging respect in her stern gaze. She offered no flowery speeches, only the brutal reality of their situation. The hive world Elysia Prime is collapsing, not from Xenos filth, but from the unyielding logic of the Necron machine legions. Our generals are incompetent. Our Imperial Guard are cattle driven to the slaughter. We have recovered your ancient form and reactivated your strategic mind. Valeria stepped closer, the harsh glow of the chamber lights reflecting off the steel tip of her scepter. "You will command the planetary defense. You will impose order where there is only death. You will use your archaic yet effective concepts of warfare to buy us time." Or she paused, allowing the word to hang heavy in the toxic air. "You will be lobotomized and serve the Emperor as a servitor, a mindless laborer. Your brilliance will be put to use, regardless." The threat was clear: obey or be enslaved. For a man who had prized his freedom, his intellect, and his will above all else, this was a more profound horror than death. Caesar stood fully now, his imposing figure dwarfing the slight, wiry frame of the Inquisitor. He was a man of the earth, yet he was surrounded by stars. He saw the cold, efficient savagery of the Imperium, a civilization that had forgotten how to live, but had perfected the art of suffering. The servitors shuffled past the reinforced viewport, their repurposed, screaming faces a chilling sight. He compared them in a moment of cold disdain to the slaves of his own era. At least a Roman slave possessed a soul. "You have mistaken discipline for barbarity," Caesar observed, the corner of his lip twitching. "You worship a corpse on a throne, and in doing so, you have allowed the discipline of true civilization to rot." He stepped off the slab, reaching for the simple, coarse tunic they had left for him. His movements were slow, deliberate, a terrifying kind of stillness that spoke of coiled, imminent violence. His mind, however, was running at the speed of 1,000 battles. The ultimate gamble: control or annihilation. He accepted the contract with a curt nod, his ambition a force that had once bent the Mediterranean to its will surging back to life. He was a general without a legion, a statesman without a senate, but he was a mind without equal. And these guardians of a backward, fearful Imperium had just handed him the ultimate theater of war. "You did not awaken me out of mercy." "You are afraid," Caesar repeated, his voice now a low, predatory rumble. He looked at the Inquisitor, then at the Magos. "Show me the map. Show me the extent of your fear." He would take this contract not to save their world, but to save himself. And in doing so, he would use their forces to forge a new cold order. As he was led out of the cryo chamber, Caesar caught sight of the great bronze symbol dominating the bulkhead, the Aquila, the two-headed imperial eagle. One head faced the past, one the future. He let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded like rust being scraped from ancient iron. One head looks to the past, one to the future, but both are blind to the present failure. His words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy whispered in the belly of the Inquisition's ship. He was free, but the prison of the 41st millennium was far vaster than his cell. Chapter 2. Elysia Secundus, the Red Battlefield. The transport shuttle, a scarred and battered Thunderhawk, tore through the toxic ochre sky of Elysia Prime like a vengeful comet. Below them, the colossal, mile-high Gothic spires of the Hive City were not towers of civilization, but vast, smoking funerary pyres. This was no Gaul, no Hispania. This was an industrial tomb, a world drowning in its own exhaust and the blood of its defenders. Caesar stood by the viewport, clad in simple, functional flak armor, a grotesque parody of his former Praetorian livery, absorbing the sheer, overwhelming scale of the Imperium's incompetence. The surface of Elysia Prime was a sea of churned mud and pulverized ferrocrete, perpetually dyed a sickening shade of rust red from the iron dust and the constant prodigious shedding of blood. Millions of Imperial Guard, huddled in trenches that offered only the illusion of safety, were dying slowly, their numbers dwindling under the precise, relentless barrage of the Necrons. These skeletal machines, these immortals, advanced not with the barbaric fury of the Gauls, but with a terrifying cold discipline, an undead parody of the very order Caesar valued. The shuttle crash-landed, or rather slammed into a hastily reinforced command bunker, throwing Caesar forward. He ignored the jarring impact, his gaze fixed on the immediate vicinity. He witnessed the collapse of a whole company of Cadians. A wave of emerald Gauss fire simply dissolved their bodies and their laser guns into vapor. Their officers, fat and panicked, merely screamed into the voxcasters for reinforcements that would never come, utterly lacking the courage to lead from the front. Ineptitude. Caesar muttered the single word, a crushing indictment of the entire war effort. He saw no strategy, only religious fervor mixed with tactical illiteracy. The Imperium's entire doctrine seemed to be rooted in a suicidal, dogmatic frontal assault, a lurching, blind charge that turned brave men into a statistic for the sake of the Emperor's will. This waste of human resources, the very foundation of any true empire, filled him with a professional disgust that outweighed any moral qualms. His first target was not the Xenos, but the pathetic remnants of a penal legion condemned criminals forced to fight and die for their chance at dubious redemption. They were a shattered, demoralized mass of human flotsam, as their faces streaked with fear and the dust of the battlefield. Their current commander, a commissar whose authority rested on the twin pillars of fear, and his bolt pistol was attempting to whip them into another useless charge. Caesar strode directly into the heart of the chaos, his presence an island of chilling calm amidst the storm. His face was a mask of cold marble, radiating an ancient, unyielding authority that had nothing to do with rank or faith. He watched the commissar execute a frightened trooper without flinching, then raised his voice above the roar of nearby Earthshaker cannon fire. Silence. The word was not a shout, but a low-frequency shockwave vibrating in the bones of the soldiers, making their frantic chattering cease instantly. The commissar turned his face a mask of purple-veined fury. Who dares intrude on imperial justice? Caesar did not argue the point of justice. He simply stepped forward, his eyes boring into the officer's soul. I am your new justice, and your justice is inefficient. I am a servant of the God Emperor, and the commissariat. I command you to fall back, the commissar shrieked, raising his bolt pistol. It was a fatal mistake. Caesar did not draw a weapon. He merely sidestepped the commissar's clumsy attempt to assert dominance, and with a move honed in the dust of a dozen forgotten wars, disarmed him, smashing the man's wrist against the metal casing of his own chest armor. He snatched the pistol, the holy relic of the commissariat, and with one swift, non-dramatic motion, placed the barrel beneath the officer's chin and fired. The sound was a deafening thump, and the commissar's helmeted head disintegrated in a cloud of crimson spray and bone fragments. Caesar let the body fall into the mud, the pistol now smoking lightly in his hand. The silence of the penal legion was absolute. They had witnessed countless executions, but never one so swift, so devoid of theatrical rage, and so profoundly subversive. The killing of an officer by another was an unthinkable heresy. Caesar threw the smoking bolt pistol at the feet of the nearest cowering trooper. Pick it up. You are now the captain of this cohort. Your name, soldier. The trooper, a man who minutes ago had accepted death, stammered, "V. Varus, sir." Varus. From this moment, discipline is more vital than faith. Discipline is the only true faith. The enemy is machine. It calculates probabilities. We will defeat it not with blind attacks, but with geometry shovels and fear. Caesar pointed to a ridgeline, an illogical position ignored by the previous command. We do not attack, we dig. We build a camp. We fortify. You will learn to fear my command more than you fear the enemy's guns. His command was an order to live, not to die meaninglessly. In this world of fanatical self-sacrifice, the notion of survival through logic was a powerful, intoxicating heresy. The tattered, condemned soldiers of the penal legion looked at the dead commissar, then at the marble-faced newcomer, and something shifted in their hollow eyes. They picked up their shovels and their laser guns, no longer driven by the fear of execution, but by the burgeoning, terrifying hope of a general who actually intended for them to see another dawn. Chapter 3. Testudo the Iron Tortoise. The battlefield had transformed not into a staging ground for a charge, but into a meticulous construction site. Under Caesar's brutal, unwavering direction, the condemned men of the penal legion, now christened the Varus cohort, dug with a maniacal energy. Trenches were carved, not shallow ditches, but complex V-shaped fortifications designed to channel and bottleneck the enemy. They salvaged the armor plating from wrecked Lehman Russ tanks, the blast doors of demolished manufactories, and even the spent casings of Earthshaker rounds. The night came, a deep, pervasive blackness, broken only by the angry, crackling rain of acid precipitation. The air was heavy with the smell of wet concrete, burning promethium, and the metallic tang of ionized air. The first wave of the Necron assault arrived not with a charge, but with a silent, methodical advance, their glowing emerald eyes reflecting the ruined landscape. Hundreds of Necron warriors, their metallic frames glinting under the pale light of Elysia Prime's twin moons, marched forward. The Necron line halted its Gauss flares, charging with their characteristic deadly green energy. Panic clawed at the throats of the Imperial guardsmen. They were trained to return fire, to scream the litanies of the Emperor, and to die. But Caesar's voice, amplified by a jury-rigged voxcaster, salvaged by Varus, cut through the fear like a sharpened pilum. Hold the line. Forget the laser guns. You are shields. You are the shell of the tortoise, formed the testudo. The command was madness. 1,000-year-old formation designed for swords and spears against the relentless, molecular disrupting fire of the Necrons. Yet the discipline Caesar had brutally instilled took hold. The soldiers in the front rank slammed their makeshift shields' thick plates of salvaged armor together, their edges overlapping. The men behind them lifted their plates above their heads, interlocking them to form a continuous, sloping carapace of rusted, blood-stained metal. The Necrons opened fire. The air filled with a terrifying, continuous hissing sound as thousands of Gauss energy beams struck the Imperial line. The energy dissolved flesh and bone, but the testudo held. Caesar had ordered the shields to be angled precisely, not flat, forcing the Necron's fire, which followed a predictable straight-line trajectory, to ricochet or dissipate across the wide surface area. The metal screamed under the assault, smelling of ozone and superheated iron. But the formation did not break. Inside the formation, the air was hot, fetid with the smell of sweat and fear. But the soldiers were alive. They could hear the green beams sizzle harmlessly inches above their heads or clang off the sloping roof, momentarily disrupting the Necron's flawless targeting logic. It was geometry over gunpowder. It was a strategy the simple-minded Necron programming could not immediately compute. Hold firm, Rome was not built in a day, but it can fall in an hour if you waver, Caesar bellowed from his position behind the main line. A simple, heavy bolter held casually in one hand, his posture utterly devoid of panic. He was not relying on the technology of this age, but on the principles of mass angle and psychological resilience. He was a beacon of cold, unshakable logic in a universe drowning in superstition. As the Necrons struggled to adjust their firing solution, their programming dictating only a relentless forward push, not a tactical repositioning, Caesar gave the second command. Second cohort. On the flanks, pilum volley. The soldiers in the two flanking columns, men who had just minutes ago been terrified prisoners, threw every sharp, scavenged piece of metal they could find. Rebar shattered knives, shrapnel at the enemy. It was a worthless volley against the Necron's self-repairing plating, but it served its purpose: psychological disruption. The true counterattack was the artillery. Magos Cole, watching from a distant command post, was aghast as Caesar ordered the Earthshaker batteries to fire at their own front line. "Are you insane, CO1? You will kill your own men," the Magos had crackled over the Vox. No, Caesar had replied, his voice chillingly calm. "I will kill the enemy who are close enough to kill my men. Danger close." The massive high-explosive rounds impacted just feet in front of the testudo. The shockwave was immense, nearly flattening the Imperial lines, but the massive bulk of the angled shields absorbed the worst of it. The Necrons, however, were thrown into disarray. The blast physically fragmented their formations, and the immense energy discharge temporarily interfered with their reanimation protocols. The assault was repelled. Not a rout, but a methodical withdrawal of the Necron forces, a temporary glitch in their relentless program. For the first time in weeks, the Imperial Guard on Elysia Prime had won a defensive action without the intervention of a Space Marine chapter. As the acid rain washed the blood from the salvaged shields, a low, hesitant chant began to rise from the mud-caked, exhausted soldiers. They had been criminals, slaves, and fodder, but now they were survivors. They had a general who did not treat them as religious sacrifices, but as tools of strategy. Imperator, Imperator. The ancient title once reserved for the god emperor was whispered like a prayer in the ruins. The iron tortoise had held, and Caesar's value had been proven in the currency of cold, hard survival. Chapter 4. The Senate of Fools. The Strategium, a cavernous, gilded command bunker nestled deep beneath the largest hive spire, was a bizarre study in anachronism. Ancient, flickering naphthalene lamps and sputtering wax candles provided light alongside the cold, clinical glow of holographic maps. The air was thick with the conflicting smells of industrial pollutants, sanctified incense, and the sickly sweet odor of human complacency. This was Caesar's new Senate. He stood before the assembled high command, a collection of lord generals inflated by inherited rank, a glowering tech priest, Dominus Magos Cole, and the omnipresent, dangerously quiet inquisitor, Valeria. On the central hololithic display, the image of the battlefield was a sickly, churning projection, but it clearly showed the undeniable success of the testudo strategy. The Lord General, a man whose face was a roadmap of aristocratic indulgence, spoke first, his voice dripping with barely concealed envy. Your methods, C01, are unorthodox, borderline blasphemous. To sacrifice sacred armor plates merely for a shield formation, it defies the sacred Codex Astartes. A space marine would never resort to such peasantry. Caesar merely steepled his fingers, his eyes drifting slowly over the ornate but tactically useless Aquila insignia plastered everywhere. The Codex General is a doctrine for those who have forgotten how to think. It is a rote recitation of another man's genius, not genius itself. It teaches you how to fight a war that has already been won. I am here to win the one you are currently losing. His words, sharp and precise, were a javelin thrown at the heart of the imperial creed, the unthinking worship of procedure. The generals bristled, their religious conviction colliding violently with the cold, successful logic they had witnessed. They demanded he press the advantage to launch a massive, full-scale counterattack, the suicidal frontal assault he had forbidden. No, Caesar stated flatly. You mistake a skirmish for a change in the strategic situation. The Necrons will adapt. Their machine mind will calculate the counter to the testudo. To throw our remaining forces in a grand, glorious charge is merely to offer them a larger funeral pyre. My strategy is not about bravery. It is about attrition and geometry. Magos Cole, a figure of hissing hydraulics and glowing red optics, found his voice. The loss of the tank armor is illogical. The holy machines of the machine god possess a greater intrinsic value than 1,000 unaugmented human lives. You prioritize flesh, Caesar 1. This is a flaw. Caesar turned to the Magos, a slight, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, the smile of a predator. Magos, you worship the machine. I worship the result. A man, when truly motivated, can wield a shovel and a rock with the force of 10, and he can be replaced with relative ease. A machine, for all its power, possesses no ambition, no will to survive, and its loss is measurable. I prize the living weapon that can adapt, not the rigid tool that must be recoded. Your logic is correct, but your valuation is flawed. The strategos was doing more than fighting a war. He was engaging in a profound philosophical battle with the very soul of the Imperium. He realized the true enemy was not the relentless Necron, but the ingrained stupidity, the suffocating dogma, and the political self-interest of the men in this room. He began his political maneuver using the Socratic method honed in his own Senate. He didn't order. He asked leading questions that exposed their internal divisions, pitting the Lord General's concern for troop numbers against the tech priest's obsession with technology. General, is your honor more important than the lives of your men? Magos, is your arch-technologist's reputation on Mars more important than a viable planetary defense? He watched them fracture their unity, dissolved by their own petty jealousies, a symphony of political decay he knew intimately. He was not leading a unified command. He was conquering a frightened, feuding city-state. Valeria the Inquisitor remained silent until the end, her presence a cold, heavy anchor. When Caesar finally turned to address her, she met his gaze without blinking. You are an excellent strategist, CO1. You have bought us time, but you play with fire. Her warning was delivered in a chilling, almost appreciative tone. You question the Codex. You disregard the sanctity of the machine god. You speak of human value, not imperial creed value. Be wary of your tongue, C01. The line between genius and heresy is thinner than a dagger's blade. We fear the failure of this world, but we fear the success of a man who forgets to bow even more. Caesar did not flinch. He knew this game. He bowed his head slightly, the very gesture a challenge. Then I shall provide you with a success so complete, so undeniable, that you will have no choice but to fear me more than my enemies. My next move is not defensive. It is a calculated violation of every doctrine you hold sacred. Chapter 5. Rubicon crossing the river. The tactical situation had settled into a grim stalemate. Caesar's meticulously dug and cleverly defended perimeter was unbreakable, but the Necron advance was relentless. To maintain the defense meant a slow, inexorable defeat by attrition. The strategic paralysis emanating from the strategium, that Senate of Fools, was a direct threat to his survival. Caesar realized that for his will to prevail, he must act outside of the official imperial chain of command. It was a cold, starless night and the kind of eternal chemical gloom that masked all sins. Caesar stood on the edge of the forward trench line, the oppressive atmosphere of the no man's land, stretching out before him like a dark, forbidden river. This was his Rubicon. He was about to commit a crime against imperial doctrine so profound it would guarantee his execution if he failed. His target, an exposed Necron energy pylon, a crucial relay for the Xenos' local tactical net. He would destroy it, plunging a massive sector of the battlefield into communications darkness and crippling their flawless coordination. His chosen legion was small. The loyalists of the Varus cohort, augmented by a hand-picked, desperate team of Mechanicus servitors' slaves. He had promised not freedom, but a clean death. The core of his strategy was the most sacred of Imperial war materials, 3 heavily armed precious ordnance carriers belonging to the Mechanicus. The plan was a direct violation of the Magos' express high-level orders. Caesar intended to use the carriers not as transports, but as sacrificial decoys. They were to be driven at maximum speed towards the Necron pylon, their valuable promethium stores armed to detonate upon impact. The Mechanicus considered their machinery holy relics. Caesar considered them merely effective expendable bombs. Valeria had planted a hidden surveillance drone, a small humming spy, and Caesar knew it. He didn't care. He spoke directly into the night, knowing his every word was being recorded back on the Black Ship. The enemy relies on logic. They will prioritize the most valuable assets we present. The Mechanicus tells us their vehicles are sacred. Then let us prove that sanctity to the Xenos. He faced his small band of followers, men whose loyalty was forged not in faith, but in surviving the horrors he had led them through. He spoke in low, firm tones, devoid of the Imperial Guard's usual religious hysteria. The success of this mission depends on the will of the man driving the ordnance. Do not expect reinforcements. Do not expect rescue. Expect only the cold certainty of vengeance. One of the soldiers hesitated, his face white beneath the grime. "Sir, the commissar said that to use holy war machines as bait is a capital heresy, a disrespect to the Omnissiah." Caesar drew a simple yet heavy-duty scavenged knife, a weapon more familiar to him than the bolt pistol. He did not threaten the man. He merely scraped the mud from its blade, his gaze steady and unforgiving. The Omnissiah is silent. The Necrons are not. If they can speak, they can die. The only heresy is failure. Go. The ordnance carriers roared to life, their heavy tracks churning up the mud and blood of the forward staging area. They were driven by the most desperate men convicts, who knew that even if they survived the Necrons, the Imperium would execute them for the crime. It was a race against the inevitable. As the vehicles sped into the open expanse of no man's land, the Necrons reacted exactly as Caesar had calculated. Their complex defensive networks immediately registered the wholly high-value assets. Massive columns of emerald fire shifted, diverting away from the human trenches and focusing on the fast-moving, high-threat vehicles. Caesar's gamble had paid off. Standing on the ridge, the wind whipping his cloak, Caesar watched the unfolding chaos. This was the thrill of command, the ultimate act of will, forcing the universe, even its terrifying machine gods, to bend to the superior logic of one man's mind. The Necron lasers streaked across the sky, finding their targets. The first carrier exploded in a magnificent, blinding flash of secondary promethium detonation. The second soon followed. In the ensuing smoke and confusion, the small cohort of infantry moved stealthily and swiftly, utilizing the cratered burning ground for cover. They reached the pylon, planted explosive charges, and retreated seconds before the final cataclysmic explosion. The Necron tactical net for the sector went silent, replaced by a deafening, localized vox static. Victory was achieved. Yet standing amongst the triumphant returnees, Caesar felt no elation, only a cold sense of confirmation. He looked at the vast, desolate landscape, his ambition momentarily transcending the battle. He raised his hand and spoke the phrase that defined his life, his voice a chilling echo of history. "Alea iacta est." The die is cast. The immediate benefit was profound, but the cost was immense. As the dust settled, Caesar's engineers reported a new terrifying discovery at the destroyed pylon's base. The Necrons were not merely defending, they were excavating. And they were in the final stages of awakening a colossal, ancient war engine, a kilometer-tall, terrifying pyramid, a monolith. Chapter 6. The Ides of March, the fateful day. The aftermath of the successful strike on the Necron pylon was an intoxicating cocktail of triumph and terror. Caesar had delivered a victory that for the first time had genuinely shifted the tactical balance. Yet the discovery of the awakening monolith cast a long, fatal shadow over their success. The army camp, built with Roman precision and discipline, hummed with a dangerous energy. The Varus cohort, and indeed many surrounding Imperial Guard regiments, now looked upon Caesar not as a temporary commander, but as an imperator, a living symbol of success. This personal fealty overriding the mandated spiritual loyalty to the God Emperor was a heresy of the gravest order. That night, the inevitable happened. Caesar was in his command tent, a functional, sparsely furnished structure rather than a gilded palace, reviewing the monolith's schematics when the assassin struck. The man was not a Necron, nor an angry guardsman, but a member of the Fratres Templar, a fanatical warrior monk order loyal only to the imperial creed. He was armed with a simple yet lethally effective monomolecular blade honed for the precise delivery of an internal bleed. The assassin was swift, driven by the certainty of his religious duty. Caesar was a sorcerer strategos, a man who used forbidden logic instead of holy zeal, and must be eliminated. The blade sliced through Caesar's simple uniform, finding its mark near his ribs. But the ancient general was not caught fully unawares. Millennia of warrior instinct, honed in the bloodiest arenas of old Earth, reacted before the man's fanatical conviction could complete the killing stroke. Caesar shifted, deflecting the killing thrust into a glancing wound that brought forth a rush of hot crimson blood, the price of his overconfidence. Before the assassin could recoil, the tent flap flew open. Varus and two other men of his cohort, acting on an intuition born of their newfound loyalty, rushed in. They were not Praetorian guards armed with fine weapons, but convicts armed with crudely sharpened shovels and loyalty more valuable than gold. They subdued the Templar with a vicious, silent efficiency. Caesar stood over his would-be killer, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. The pain was sharp, an almost welcome reminder of his mortality and the stakes. He looked at the face of the assassin, twisted in a snarl of religious ecstasy and hatred, and understood the true conflict. It was not man versus Xenos. It was dogma versus freedom of thought. He dismissed Varus, instructing him to keep the incident under absolute secrecy. A temporary lapse of discipline, nothing more. He looked at the kneeling, spitting assassin, a tool of the very system he was trying to save. "You are no Brutus," Caesar murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "Brutus believed in the Republic. You believe in nothing but the fear of your priests." The assassin spat blood in defiance. "You are an unholy abomination. You are the serpent in the garden. You are a dead god walking." Caesar did not deny the title. He merely knelt, looking the fanatic directly in the eye, the cold light of his ambition burning bright. "Even Brutus could not kill me a second time. I am Rome. I am the unyielding necessity of order." He did not execute the man. The Templar was a zealous killer, but zeal was a renewable resource. Caesar made a decision that would cement his heretical power base. He spoke not of faith, but of truth. "Your priests sent you to kill me, to save their reputation, not their souls. The Necrons were not defeated by your prayers. They were defeated by my logic. Your loyalty is wasted on the corrupt. I offer you a true purpose vengeance against the fools who ordered your blood spilled." In a universe where every man sought meaning, Caesar offered a raw, simple, empowering truth that cut through the imperial creed. He offered the assassin a place in his burgeoning personal guard, a new secret Praetorian guard, their loyalty forged not in faith, but in the shared heresy of survival and cold, intellectual conviction. The assassin, confronted by a living, breathing, godlike figure who saw him not as a tool of faith, but as a tool of will, broke. He knelt lower, no longer in defiance, but in a profound, terrified submission. Caesar had survived the Ides of March, but the act of survival had changed him. He was no longer merely a prisoner strategist. He was a burgeoning cult leader, an uncrowned emperor who had successfully siphoned off the most dangerous essential currency of the Imperium, personal loyalty. His power was now beyond the control of the strategium. Chapter 7. The Gallic Wars. In space. The awakening of the Necron monolith was not a tactical shift. It was a cosmic declaration of doom. The colossal obsidian pyramid rose from the churned earth, its geometry an insult to the haphazard architecture of the Hive City. It drifted across the devastated plains, a silent, implacable engine of destruction, its energy weapons shearing through the armor of Lehman Russ tanks as though they were paper. The air itself seemed to crackle and scream under the monolith's oppressive presence. The Lord Generals in the strategium descended into paralyzing bureaucratic terror. They issued frantic contradictory orders: bombard it with orbital support, attack it with suicidal airborne flyers, wait for a space marine intervention. They had no plan, only rituals of sacrifice. Caesar, however, saw not a monster, but a logistical problem. He saw in the monolith's methodical movement its predictable energy output, the same flaws he had exploited in their infantry. It was a machine, and all machines followed rules. He named his new operation after his greatest historical triumph, the Siege of Alesia. We will not defeat it with a frontal attack, for its shield is unbreakable. We will defeat it with time shovels and logic, Caesar announced to his commanders, his voice amplified across the entire network, sidelining the official strategium. The Necrons are a siege. We will answer with a counter-siege. We will build a double circumvallation. The plan was staggering in its scale and sheer arrogance. While the monolith was marching slowly toward the main imperial defenses, Caesar commanded the construction of a massive fortified ring in the inner ring to contain the immediate Necron forces accompanying the monolith. Crucially, he then ordered the construction of a second, even larger outer ring, turning the Imperial Guard's defensive position into a massive fortress designed to repel any Necron reinforcements arriving from other sectors. The work was brutal, relentless. Hundreds of thousands of Imperial Guardsmen, now driven by Caesar's cult of victory, rather than the commissariat's fear, dug like frenzied moles. They laid anti-tank mines, established massive interlocking fields of fire, and built palisades of steel rebar. Caesar was everywhere, inspecting the angles of the trenches, correcting the placement of every heavy bolter, his presence a constant, unyielding pressure. He found the flaw in the Necron's logic while reviewing the monolith's energy signatures. Its primary power source, its reanimation matrix, relied on a constant, uninterrupted power flow from a network of local pylons and subterranean cables. While the monolith itself was an unstoppable engine of war, its support system was fixed and linear. They calculate mass and firepower. They do not calculate patience, Caesar observed, standing directly on the newly established inner perimeter, the sound of the monolith's massive energy discharge making the earth beneath his feet tremble. They believe that because they are eternal, we will tire. We will show them the eternity of human will. He led the final inspection of the siege lines from the very front, ignoring the desperate pleas of his own officers to retreat to a safer position. This was not a military necessity. It was an act of political theater. He had to embody the unshakable will that the God Emperor, being a paralyzed corpse, could not. He had to be the living imperator. The siege lines were completed barely an hour before the main Necron assault began. The monolith was now contained isolated within Caesar's concentric rings. The structure of the siege itself was the weapon the Necrons could not send reinforcements into the inner ring without being channeled into lethal killing fields. The final confrontation began not with a battle cry, but with a horrifying metallic scraping sound. The monolith's main defensive weapon charged, casting an eerie emerald glow over the entire battlefield. And then, from the colossal pyramid's central arch, a figure emerged, a being of ancient, polished silver, wielding a spear of crackling green energy, a Necron lord. The challenge was issued not in words, but in the brutal silent language of single combat. A war of champions, ancient intellect versus ancient intelligence. Chapter 8. ET2 Tech Priest Technology versus Humanity. The emergence of the Necron Lord was a shock, a deviation from the cold, automaton-like behavior of the Xenos. It was a sign of frustration, of a machine mind pushed to the limits of its patience. As the Silver Warrior stood defiant in the ring of trenches, a new conflict erupted. Not on the front lines, but in the command bunker. Magos Cole, his electronic eyes flashing with an angry, panicked red, stormed into Caesar's makeshift command post. The tech priest's logic circuits were overloaded with conflicting data. You are deviating from the protocols. The monolith is trapped. Now we must utilize the Titan Legion protocols, retreat, regroup, and preserve the holy engines of war. The Magos saw only the danger to the Mechanicus' sacred machinery. The tanks, the heavy artillery, the power generators. His logic, dictated by the absolute dogma of the Omnissiah, was to preserve the machine over the transient life of the unaugmented human. He was ready to issue a command override, ordering all Mechanicus assets to fall back, which would leave Caesar's human legions utterly exposed. Caesar, standing before the main tactical holomap, did not raise his voice. He merely turned, and with a swiftness that belied his age, drew a stolen heavy-caliber bolter, a profane, oversized weapon for a mere man, and pressed the muzzle against the Magos's primary optical sensor. The act was a breathtaking heresy, threatening a sacred servant of the machine god with a weapon they considered primitive. "Withdraw and you die." Magos Caesar's voice was utterly devoid of emotion, colder than the deepest void. "You will die here as a pile of scrap metal. Your logic is sound, Cole, but your value assessment is flawed. You worship a cog. I worship the man who turns it." The air hung heavy with the smell of ozone and the tension of absolute, irreconcilable ideological conflict. Caesar was confronting the very core tenet of the 41st millennium, the dehumanization of man. These soldiers, Caesar swept his hand toward the viewport where the guardsmen were preparing for the Necron Lord's final attack, are not cattle. They are not scrap. They are the ultimate renewable resource. They possess loyalty and will. Your machines can be built again. But the loyalty of a desperate, victorious man, that is a unique and irreplaceable currency. Heresy. The Magos hissed the word, a burst of angry static from his vox grill. You preach humanism, CISO-1. You preach the value of the soul over the sacred blueprint. I preach the value of victory. Cole. Caesar countered, his finger pressing down ever so slightly on the bolter's trigger. And victory requires sacrifice. Your machines will serve as shields to these men. The Lehman Russ chassis will become sandbags. The Sentinel walkers will be used as expendable fire magnets. They will die so the man with the laser gun can live and fight again. The Magos Cole's internal processing struggled. To obey was an unforgivable sin against the Omnissiah. To disobey was immediate annihilation at the hands of a man whose logic was as terrifyingly effective as any machine. The choice was between religious dogma and survival. After a tense, agonizing moment, the Magos let his multi-limbed appendages drop. He was defeated not by force, but by the cold, superior logic of a man who saw humans, not machines, as the ultimate tools of war. I obey, Imperator." He sputtered the title, a bitter concession. "But a signal will be sent. A warning to the High Lords of Mars. Subject CO1 is compromised. Danger level extreme." Caesar lowered the bolter, a brief, triumphant light in his icy eyes. He had won the battle for the loyalty of the Imperial Guard, and now he had successfully subjugated the Mechanicus. He had forced the machine worshippers to sacrifice their gods for the benefit of his men. The sight of this brutal, terrifying humanism filled the watching guardsmen with a profound, awed respect. Caesar had just declared the human soldier more valuable than the sacred machine. Chapter 9. The Colosseum, the Arena. The final battle was joined in the central bowl of the concentric siege lines, a man-made Colosseum of mud, pulverized rock, and the smoking wrecks of Mechanicus vehicles now serving as grotesque, impromptu fortifications. The Necron Lord, a figure of silent, terrible grace, stood at the epicenter, its crackling energy spear, ready to deal death. Caesar knew he could not engage the Necron Lord in single combat. To do so would be suicidal idiocy, and the Necron's strength, speed, and regenerative abilities were simply too great. The Imperial Guard's generals would have thrown their champion at the monster in a glorious, senseless duel. Caesar would not. His method was simpler, colder, and far more effective. Overwhelming, focused destruction achieved through expendable assets. His tactic was not a duel, it was a trap. Caesar ordered his most loyal infantry, the Reformed Penal Legion, to charge the Necron Lord, not to fight it, but to pin its attention. It was a feigned, chaotic human wave intended to draw the Xenos into the central heavily mined zone. Meanwhile, Caesar and a small command squad positioned themselves at a key choke point in the outer ring. As the Necron Lord effortlessly tore through the first wave of attackers, its programming focused entirely on the closest, most visible threat, a wave of human ferocity it could not logically compute. The Lord, having calculated the simple kinetic threat, failed to anticipate the true danger. Caesar gave the command over the shrieking voxcasters, his voice a pure distilled urgency. Fire all available batteries, coordinates on our position. Danger close. A volley of every available artillery piece, basilisks, earth shakers, even salvaged orbital defense cannons ignited the air. The resulting barrage was not aimed at the monolith, but at the ground around the Necron Lord and the hapless guardsmen still engaging it. The sound was an apocalyptic, lung-compressing roar of the feeling of the concussion waves pressing Caesar's body to the ferrocrete. This was his ultimate gamble, sacrificing his own immediate position to destroy the enemy's linchpin. Shrapnel rained down, the ground liquefied. Caesar was knocked back, his arm broken by the force of the blast blood streaming down his face from a dozen minor wounds. The intense bombardment created a shockwave and an electromagnetic pulse that momentarily overloaded the Necron Lord's sophisticated defensive matrix. The Necron Lord, though not physically destroyed by the sheer force, was momentarily immobilized, its reanimation protocols struggling to cope with the continuous, unpredictable, and geometrically precise impact of the heavy ordnance. It was a machine forced into a temporary system crash. That was the moment Caesar had been waiting for. He scrambled, ignoring the pain in his arm, and retrieved a crudely jury-rigged explosive pack, a massive pile of high-grade plastic explosives meant for demolishing walls. With the help of his new Praetorian Guard, he threw the pack directly into the still-smoking cratered zone where the Lord stood. The final explosion was smaller than the artillery strike, but far more precise. It detonated the Necron Lord's internal core, tearing the silver figure to pieces and permanently disrupting its reanimation protocols. It was a death not of glory, but of expedient demolition. The monolith, its command structure and local power relay destroyed, began to falter. Its colossal form wavered, its protective shield sputtered, and with a horrifying grinding screech of displaced metal, the terrifying pyramid began its slow, inevitable collapse, crashing into the pulverized earth. Silence descended, a profound, ringing silence, broken only by the wounded cries of the survivors. Caesar rose from the rubble, his simple field armor scarred and bloodied, his stolen power sword, a weapon he had retrieved from a fallen commander, snapped in half. He stood on the ruined remains of the monolith, a figure of mud, blood, and broken bone, but undeniably victorious. The Imperial guardsmen, thousands strong, erupted. They threw their lasguns into the air. They were no longer praying. They were chanting the ancient forgotten title, Imperator of Caesar. Caesar stood not as a man of faith, but as a man of will who had saved their lives. He raised his bloody, broken hand in acknowledgement. Veni vidi, de levi I came, I saw, I destroyed. But the moment of triumph was violently interrupted. The sky above them split not by Necron fire, but by the roar of powerful engines. A massive black and gold Thunderhawk gunship, far more pristine and imposing than the one that brought him, descended. The war for Elysia Prime was won, but the war for Caesar's future was just beginning. The Angels of Death had arrived. Chapter 10, The Angels of Death. The Victory Square, a scene of ecstatic human triumph, was instantly frozen into a tableau of terrifying silence. The massive Thunderhawk, bearing the insignia of the Ultramarines, the epitome of the Codex rigidity, touched down with a deafening hydraulic hiss. Its ramp lowered, revealing not messengers of congratulation, but towering figures clad in flawless blue and gold power armor, the Space Marines. the God Emperor's ultimate terrifying enforcers. Their chapter master, a figure of immense physical and spiritual authority, stepped forward, his ornate bolter held in a position of ready threat. He was a living demigod, untouched by the grime and blood of the recent battle. Behind him, flanked by two other Marines, stood Inquisitor Valeria, her expression severe, her eyes colder than the void. The Space Marine's voice amplified to a terrifying, inhuman roar, cut through the tense silence. By the authority of the High Lords of Terra and the Inquisition, we place the subject known as C-01 under arrest. The accusation was simple, brutal and shocking to the exhausted victorious troops. You are charged with tech heresy for the wanton destruction of sacred Mechanicus assets and usurpation, for unlawfully seizing command authority and cultivating a personal heretical cult of personality. The massive silent army of Imperial guardsmen who had just been chanting Caesar's name stood transfixed. They had been criminals, then heroes, and now their savior was being called a heretic. The conflict was laid bare. War hero versus political criminal. The practical justice of survival versus the rigid, unforgiving law of the Imperium. Caesar, still bleeding from his broken arm and the wound inflicted by the assassin, made no move to resist. He slowly broke the useless snapped power sword in half and let the pieces fall. He had known this moment was inevitable. In the 41st millennium, the greatest crime was not failure, but success outside of the established dogma. He met the Space Marine's gaze, his eyes full of the cold, dismissive contempt of a true genius confronting a well-drilled, unoriginal mind. I saved this world when your angels were polishing their armor in orbit. I won the battle with logic, a resource you clearly lack. His voice, though mortal, carried a weight of authority that the Marine's amplified roar could not match. You come to judge me. I judge the weakness of your empire. Valeria stepped forward, her face a mask of regretful necessity. The Emperor requires obedience, not ambition, C-01. You have proven yourself too effective, too charismatic, and thus too dangerous. Your legend must be crushed before it inspires wider heresy. It was a tragedy of necessity. The Imperium could not tolerate a hero who owed his triumph to his own genius, rather than the Emperor's divine will. A low, dangerous murmur began to spread through the crowd. A soldier of the Varus cohort, his face black with powder and tears, yelled, "He saved us. Don't touch our Imperator." In a spontaneous, desperate act of defiance, the soldier threw a handful of dirt and rock at the Space Marine. It was a pathetic gesture, but it was the spark. A low-grade, furious riot began to bubble up from the tired, loyal troops. The Space Marines instantly raised their bolters, ready to execute the very men Caesar had just saved. But before the slaughter could begin, Caesar raised his uninjured hand, his gaze sweeping over the frenzied, loyal faces of the Imperial Guard. "Halt the command" was not a request. It was an absolute stop command, the voice of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. The crowd froze their loyalty to him, overriding their hatred for the Space Marines. He looked at the Space Marine, then back at his men, a look of profound, almost sublime sadness on his face. "Do not fight for me. Your loyalty is noted. Your life is still needed. Submit to the will of the Empire. For now." He was not submitting to the Space Marine. He was submitting to the larger strategic necessity to ensure the survival of his own loyal nascent legion. Chapter 11. The Triumph in Chains. Elysia Prime receded into the chemical fog below a victory bought by blood and genius, now abandoned for the sterile confines of the Inquisitor's prison ship. Caesar was not granted a cell, but a heavily guarded interrogation chamber, his wrists shackled with massive cold adamantium cuffs. The triumph was short-lived, replaced by the clanking sound of his chains and the low hum of the ship's gravity drives. The interrogation was not about guilt. His success was undeniable. It was a duel of wits, a cold, calculated dissection of his ambition by Inquisitor Valeria. She sat across from him, sipping a synth coffee, her face an impassive mask of intellectual assessment. "We do not desire your death, C-01. Valeria admitted, setting her cup down with a sharp clink. "Your strategic genius is a resource. A terrible, wonderful resource. But your ambition is a greater threat than any Wak or Xenos fleet. You inspire Caesar. And in this empire, inspiration must only come from one source. You chain my hands, but my mind is touring your palaces." Valeria Caesar retorted, his voice calm, betraying no fear. He leaned forward, the chains rattling a metallic counterpoint to his words. "You mistake fear for governance. This empire is not stable. It is merely immobile. It is a dying man, kept alive by life support and superstition. It needs a surgeon, not a priest. And you see yourself as that surgeon. I see myself as the only one willing to excise the rot. Your emperor conquered the stars by logic and science. Your priests maintain them by dogma and sacrifice. You have forgotten the first principle of power: adapt or die." The conversation was philosophical, yet deadly. Valeria acknowledged the truth of his assessment, which made her fear him all the more. "You wish for the throne, do you not? You wish to replace the god emperor with the strategos." Caesar smiled, a cold, frightening expression. "I wish to replace a flawed system with an efficient one. I do not seek the throne for vanity. I seek it to ensure the survival of the human race, which you are currently failing to do. You are not keeping the empire safe. You are only making its death slow." He spent the time not pleading, but sowing seeds of doubt into the minds of the prison guards, tired, underpaid men of the Fratres Templar, who had seen the death of their own kind under the current command structure. He spoke to them of fairness, of logic, of a commander who valued their lives. He turned the prison itself into a new, smaller Senate, where his ideas of rebellion and true order could be safely whispered. Valeria's decision was a masterful compromise of expediency and terror. "You will not be killed. That is too wasteful. You will be sent on a journey to Terra for final processing, or perhaps to a more immediate suicidal war zone, where your gifts can be expended one last time." Caesar merely closed his eyes, accepting the sentence. He had achieved his goal: survival and the creation of a loyal base. He knew the nature of the Imperium. It was always hungry, always in need of a miracle. He was the miracle they needed, and he would always be called upon again. Suddenly, a red alert siren began to blare. The voxcaster in the interrogation chamber burst into a frantic spray of static and desperate reports. A new catastrophic threat had emerged. A massive Tyranid hive fleet was approaching a crucial sector. The Imperium was once again facing imminent annihilation. Valeria's face, usually impassive, showed a momentary flicker of pure, unadulterated fear. Her aide rushed in, holding a data slate. "Inquisitor, the strategic models are catastrophic. We need a Class Omega counter-strategy." Valeria looked at Caesar, sitting in chains, his expression one of perfect, cold expectation. She knew the terrible truth. We need him again. Chapter 12. Exilium, Exile. Caesar was transferred to a secure, solitary confinement chamber, a space ironically luxurious compared to the cramped confines of the Imperial Guard barracks, but utterly isolated. The only window was a thick, plasteel viewport, looking out into the empty, cold abyss of the void. He was alone, but his mind was not. He was not resting. He had no need of sleep, only calculation. Using his own blood secreted from the still healing wound of the Ides of March assassination attempt, he began to draw meticulous strategic maps on the pristine white walls. They were not maps of Elysia Prime, but of the entire sector, the transit routes, the supply chains, the political and religious pressure points of the imperial governors. He was not a prisoner. He was a general planning his next grand conquest. His body was chained, but his thoughts were utterly free. He had learned the terrifying, intoxicating scale of the Imperium, an empire so vast it was impossible for one man to truly control. He no longer desired to simply lead a legion or save a world. He realized the imperial throne was not the prize, it was the prison. His goal was now clear: a new Rome, a separate, logical, undogmatic empire carved out of the chaos, built on his philosophy of efficiency and logic, and guarded by the fierce, heretical loyalty of the men he had saved. He had his soldiers, the loyalists from the Penal Legion, his secret Praetorian Guard. Now he needed a means of escape, a vessel, and the resources to sustain a rebellion. The door to his cell hissed open. It was not Inquisitor Valeria. It was a figure clad in ornate yet scarred deep blue armor, and a velvet cloak, the attire of a high-ranking, officially sanctioned, but legally autonomous rogue trader. The man's face was obscured by shadow and a cynical smirk. He was a creature of the void, bound by no imperial law save profit. Of Imperator, the rogue trader whispered the title, a low, respectful hiss. "I have come bearing a contract CO1, a most interesting proposal." "The Inquisition sent you to test my loyalty again," Caesar asked, his voice flat. "The Inquisition sent me to bring you supplies and a plea for help against the Tyranids. I, however, am interested in a much larger profit margin. Your talent is being wasted on their tedious wars. They will use you until you break, then they will discard you. You are too valuable for such a predictable end." The rogue trader tossed a small, finely wrought data slate onto Caesar's cot. "The Alpha Legion, a splinter of the Black Legion. An exiled toe ethereal. I have connections, General. I offer you an alliance, escape the Inquisition, take my fleet, and establish your own order. Build your new Rome where the Emperor's light cannot reach." It was the ultimate temptation, freedom, resources, and the chance to challenge the entire imperial structure. Caesar's heart, though ancient, beat with a slow, powerful rhythm. The choice was simple: the mandatory, dangerous service of a slave, or the unpredictable, terrible freedom of a king. Caesar looked from the drawing of his battle plan on the wall to the vast, terrifying emptiness of the void outside his window. He smiled, a genuine, chilling expression of pure, unadulterated ambition. He had his legion. He had his philosophy. Now he had his fleet. "I would rather be the first man in a barbarian village than the second man in Rome." Or in their gilded prison of Terra, Caesar said, his eyes glittering with a reflection of distant cold stars. He held out his chained hands. "Let us go." The rogue trader chuckled, a dry, satisfied sound. "Excellent. The Caesar's will is ready to depart." The camera lingers on the blood-scrawled strategic map, then closes in on the two snapped halves of the power sword left on the cot. The screen cuts to black. The sound of heavy, measured footsteps, Caesar's footsteps, no longer shackled, echoes for a moment in the darkness. Do you think Caesar will stay loyal to the Emperor or found his own empire? Comment Ave Caesar if you want to see him conquer Terra in Part 3.